Welcome back. Today we've got something brand new in front of us here. So what you're looking at is a Meus aluminum ripper for the SCX24 platform. So these guys came in 3 different variants from Meus on their website: a black and red, an orange and silver, and a silver and silver. So let's turn this guy around and see what we've got here. So we've got an orange 29. So all of these were uniquely numbered and engraved on the frame. I'm not sure the total count. For some reason 200 is sticking in my mind. I'm not sure if that's 200 for the full run of all colors or 200 of each color, but I'm sure somebody in the comments will know. So this thing is still sealed, as you can see. So I have no idea really what I'm getting into other than what I've seen elsewhere. I do have parts, obviously, to jump into this build, so I think without further delay, let's just set this guy aside and forget about it, because underneath it, I've got something even better. We've got the even more limited pink version. So this is a pink chassis with white panels. This was only available on Amazon, and these sold out within minutes, hours. I believe there was 23 of the pink white, and they also made, I want to say, a silver chassis with a blue panel variant of maybe 20. So again, if you know the exact numbers, feel free to comment, but I think without any further delay, let's actually get into this box, get into another box, and get into the pinky. Back again, now with a pink 162. So obviously these aren't numbered 1 through 23, so there may be 200 total, and this is just 23 out of that sequence, potentially, just wherever they fell. I'm guessing they just stamped, or engraved the chassis as they made them, sent them through, numbered them all, then went back potentially to anodization. So maybe that's really the reason for the numbering. Either way, it doesn't really matter for the build. It's just part of that kind of limited edition nature. So I think without further delay, we're going to slice into this guy. So it looks like it's maybe a flap type lid here. No going back. We have broken the seal. So let's get this guy open. So I am super pumped to check this finish out in person. Alrighty. Look at that. Super nice packaging. Nice big foam pad here. Get the sticker out of the way. What do we have? Look at that. That is just gorgeous. Wow. Just fantastic. Looks like some more stickers. Get those out of the way. Let's see. I guess let's just pull this. There we go. Coming right on out. Look at this guy. That is fantastic. Just gorgeous. Wow. All right, so what else? We get the required adjustable servo mount as well, and we get a white matching bumper. And it looks like we've got a few other parts to dig out. So I'm going to get all of this stuff out and we can take a closer look at all these parts and pieces. But man, that is gorgeous. Wow. Okay, got everything pulled out of the box here. So it looks like you get, of course, your adjustable tray and hardware and post for that. They give you a battery strap. They give you a ton of extra hardware. Black Phillips head, and then typical hex head here as well. And then, of course, the bumper, as I said earlier. But everything is already assembled here. So I guess all that hardware they give you is just extra as far as the black ones, because you're not going to need any more of those Phillips head, it doesn't look like. And then the other hardware, I guess you could just use as needed for assembly. But man, this thing is just awesome looking, just really nice finish. So this is a pricey little guy right here. And a lot of the cost is due to this frame. So as you see, this is not welded. This is machined out of a solid piece of billet aluminum. Everything is one piece on this frame except for the top portion of the shock tower. You can see there's a couple of screws there. That's a little piece that's held on, and that is because this outer bar obviously blocks those holes, so there wouldn't be a way to tap those and thread them. So they can thread the bottom run, so that is part of the chassis. It's just that upper piece that's extra. But then other than the panels and the interior, that's it. So really solid frame, if you will, and some cool little parts there. You can detail up those helmets, I guess, and the interior, and then they give you a nice little 3D printed radiator that is fairly loose, and figured out a way to tighten that down. But you can see here the engraving. So maybe I was wrong. It seems like you'd have to anodize these first and then come back and engrave them to cut that. So don't know how they did the numbering on these, but however it is, this is 162. So I think now that we've gotten a look at what we're going to be building, I think we're going to take a look at some of the parts and see how we're going to be building it. So the first parts actually ordered along with the chassis were these Meus axle assemblies. So these are pretty new from them. They're what they're calling their isokinetic axles. They have a double universal joint, and it's supposedly going to give you somewhere in the 50-degree steering angle. I'm not sure exactly what they advertise, but I'll put that on the screen. And then I went ahead and grabbed the Meus Ripper specific light kit. So this has really large LEDs to fit the headlights, and then a light bar and the hardware. So that's something that we'll get into, I'm sure, much later in the build. And then shortly after, I went ahead and decided on this Shift Nano M servo with the etching. I thought that would look really nice with the white panels. So of course I had to get the matching servo horn from them as well. So I think the first thing we're going to do is jump into these axles and see what those are all about. Let's get a closer look at this axle set here. So it's a pretty complete setup. So you get your steering linkage, and then you get an aluminum adjustable tray, which of course this pink kit came with a brass adjustable tray. So we've got an option there. Also comes with a link riser, which is nice. And because the gearing in this front diff is a custom gearing, it says it will not work with any other SCX24 gearing. So it's not interchangeable. Both axles come set up with a 214 gear, but they give you a 216 gear. So this can swap into the rear diff, and it will actually give the front a 14% overdrive. So that's a nice option. So I think I'll be swapping that in to get the overdrive up here, and then verifying on the website the knuckles are brass and the diff covers are both brass. So you've got a little bit of weight there already down low. So really nice setup, and these guys are super smooth. And you can see this, it's 52 degrees is the steering angle, and you can see that here. And there is absolutely no bind or jerkiness or movement at the knuckles. Just super smooth. It's very heavy, so it's kind of hard for me to spin it without an axle on there. But very impressive so far, just on the table. And then the rear, first thing I noticed was just how loose this worm gear is. Just a ton of play right there. So I'm going to crack that open, swap the gear, and maybe put an O-ring or two on that guy to tighten it up a little. But overall, very nice. You can see how large these pumpkins are. They're really big compared to stock axles. But I think I'm going to get these assembled, greased up, and then we'll take a look comparing those to stock axles. Let's take a quick look inside this rear axle while I've got it cracked open. So it does come greased, and you can see the rear has gears that are the same size as SCX24, but there were no O-rings on that worm gear. So that is the reason for all that slop back and forth. And then you can see the unique shape here of that brass diff cover. So that sits, of course, on the inside of the axle, similar to a Super 8. So it leaves that front edge on the front axle nice and clean, and definitely looks a lot cleaner because you don't see any of the hardware from the outside of the vehicle. But anyways, that is a little peek inside the rear axle. Another quick note on this rear axle. So it's almost like the people assembling it didn't know where the O-rings went. So what I found was an O-ring on the outside of the bearing behind the pin. So there's really no need for that. You've got retainer screws that hold that bearing in. So you can see there's play on both of these axles, so in and out play there. But once you actually put the pin in and put a hex on, and if you seat a wheel fully on that hex, there's no more play. I mean, there's just like a hair bit of play, but they're not needed. So I've never seen them there. I'm gonna take them out, and now I've got an O-ring. So I've got two O-rings here, one per side, so I can use them on the worm gear, but just something quirky there. So maybe that's why they didn't have the O-rings on the worm gears. Another nice note is once you take out this 214 from the rear, put the 216 in there, you've got a spare 14% overdrive for any SCX24 now, so that's handy. So now we've got a 216 in the rear, and then the front stays at 214, so that gives us that 14% overdrive. So I'm going to finish up assembly, and then we'll look at that front axle. Well, I may have spoken too soon on the source of all that play in the worm gear. So I thought initially it was due to the lack of having both of the O-rings there, which I've rectified now. But as I was getting ready to reassemble, I got the diff cover and noticed there's no bearing in there. So I'm sure that was just a mistake, but that would be the cause of excessive wobble for sure. So I'm gonna get a bearing and swap one in there, get it reassembled, and hopefully that'll be a nice, smooth, tight connection. And I'm definitely going to crack the front axle and double check that that actually has a bearing in it, but just something to look out for there. Back with a final piece of assembly here on this rear axle. So you can see I've got these two little O-rings removed that I did have on the worm gear. So once I actually got that bearing installed in the diff cover, two O-rings was way too tight, and one was a little bit tighter than my liking. So this is nice and greased up, nice and free spinning with no O-rings. So I think we're going to leave it that way. Got the link riser on here as well. It's got thinner mount points than stock SCX24 axles, so you're not going to be able to use any other link riser but this one. But this looks like it'll work just fine. And then the last little thing, you can see this larger O-ring, this thicker one. So both the front and the rear have these as well between the hex and the nut, and I think that is due to just the large amount of space left. You can see that hex is not seated on the pin, so when you actually seat it fully, there's quite a bit of space there, and that nut is tightened down to the bottom of the thread. So if you had a wheel with a thin hub, you'd potentially not be able to tighten that wheel down ever, even with the nut fully to the bottom of the thread. So I'm guessing they give you this guy to squeeze in there to take up some of that slack. But anyways, we'll look into that more when we get to mounting wheels up. But I think for now, we're going to jump to the front axle. Hey, a little front axle progress, finally. So no surprises inside this diff. The worm gear had one O-ring on the outer face, and there was a bearing on both sides of this worm gear. So just a hair bit of play there. It's nice and free spinning, nice weighty axle. So I got some grease in that as well. And then obviously got the links on there. You can see I unthreaded the main link for a little bit of toe out, just a little bit. And then in doing that, I discovered my link was bent a little wonky. So it's going one direction here, it's going a different direction here. From the top, you can't really tell, but if you lay it down, you can definitely tell. And if I turn it lock to lock, you definitely start to see the Z right there. So they were just bent just a little bit off. I don't think that's going to matter, just a little defect. There is a small bend here in this drag link, and that from the website photos goes to the knuckle end. But other than that, no problems with this axle. Feels nice and smooth. So looking at the servo tray, these are the same as the rear axle. So this is the aluminum one that came with the axles. It's got the thin tabs. This is the brass one that came with the ripper. So it's got the standard thick tabs for the SCX24 axles. Other than that, these look the same except for the mount tabs. And you can see these are kind of blocky, just rectangles that come with the brass. This one has some nice, very well designed offset mount tabs. And of course the reason these are so nice and well designed is these are straight knockoffs of the original best servo mount ever. So they couldn't get away with knocking off the entire servo tray, but they sure stole the uprights from Mofo. But anyways, other than that, these two trays look the same as far as the link setup. It's a outer capture, and you can actually 3-link this because the outer hole is large enough for the hardware head to go through, so you could go ahead and drive that all the way through. And the brass one actually comes with some little inserts that looks like you could put in this outer larger hole. They don't seem to be required. If you do this, you're going to have to use like a 12mm to actually get some engagement here. If you don't use them and you thread this in flush, you could get away with the 10, which are much more common. So that's what I've got here, 10. And this aluminum did not come with any of these sleeves. So anyways, we're going to disregard the brass set that came with the ripper, and we're going to go ahead and get this aluminum one mounted up and get a servo on there. Got the servo installed and realized I never went over the specs of this guy. So any way we go, this is going to be pretty powerful. I'm not sure the ESC I'm going to be using yet, so I'm not sure the voltage. But you can see there at the max we're at 151, at the low end 115 ounce inches. So super powerful. And even if this servo was the worst servo in the world, it is still just gorgeous. So I think that is going to look great against the white panels. I think that was a good decision, even though you're not going to see a ton of it. But here we've got the stock axle next to it, and you can see the difference in that pumpkin. It's just massive. These knuckles as well, these are comparable to like Treal's heavyweight brass knuckles, like the super heavyweight ones. I believe OGRC makes some big chunky ones, and now Hot Racing does as well. But this is your stock SCX guy. So small knuckles, small pumpkin, and I believe this is a +5 per side versus the stock axle. So a little bit extra width as well as steering angle. So anyways, that's the front axle. That's the rear axle, that's the comparison. So now we've got that out of the way, we've kind of got these 3 main assemblies. So I'm curious what the weight of this chassis is. So we're gonna get all 3 of these on the scale and see where we're starting. Okay, I've got our 3 major assemblies so far, ready to weigh. Let's get these scales zeroed out, and we'll see where we stand this early in the build. So 108.5 grams on that front axle, about 35 grams on the rear axle, so good front bias already. So the big question is the aluminum chassis. Let's get that bumper on there. So 123 grams for the chassis, so not bad at all. We've got more low weight unsprung right now in the form of axles than we do sprung weight for that chassis. If we were to stop here, that'd be good news, but of course we're not stopping. We are going to add a little more sprung weight in the form of a motor and a transmission. But to do that, I think I'm going to have to remove all of the panels to get a little better access, a little better view inside, and we can see what motor and motor mount is actually going to work with this interior tray. So you can see it may be quite limiting in height. So we may have to change directions on motors or possibly modify that interior tray to fit our selection. But luckily I've got quite a few motors on hand if we need to sidestep, but I do have one in mind. So I think that's the next thing, is let's get out some of those assemblies and see what we're working with. Okay, back to a little teardown progress, as you can see here, and a couple clarifications on this chassis. So I was incorrect on the amount of removable pieces. You can see the cross brace for the roof is another removable piece, as well as these 2 cross braces here for the shocks. But other than those 3 pieces, it is one solid machined piece. And then the black hardware for all the panels was actually hex head, so that made removing those very convenient. So everything came apart super nice. So we are ready to move on. So the parts I've got ready to go here are Mofo RC's aluminum skid, his bulletproof transmission that is all aluminum here. He offers this in brass as well. So this is the version that comes with the aluminum spur gear cover and the brushed slotted motor mount. So you get much more adjustment there for a larger pinion. You can also order this a few bucks cheaper without the motor mount or the spur gear cover. So it's basically set up directly for a brushless motor mount. That way, saves you some money. Also, a 0.5 mod spur gear is always included, as well as the 0.3 that's installed. So just an awesome builder's option there. It gives you all kinds of options, great price, and like I said, hardened steel gears, so you can't go wrong. And then for the motor and the ESC, I'm trying out this Furitek torpedo combo unit here. So it's all sold together. I've tried the cedar before, but not this Python Pro. So this is the replacement to the Ultimate. So it's a little larger footprint and a little bit different specs here, but it's fairly similar. So let's take a look here at the specs. See if this will focus in. So unlike the Ultimate, you can see the Python Pro in the middle there. You can actually choose a 7.4 volt BEC. So with the Ultimate, you could not. It did not have that option. You could just jump right up to the 8.4 only. Other than that, 40 amp, 70 amp burst, so that's the same. And this can handle 4S LiPo, so that's a difference here than the Ultimate. That was a 3S, but other than that, very similar. So potentially we're going to try this out. We'll see about fitment. I do have some other ESCs as well, but I think the first thing I'm noticing here is the typical pegs here that are on all of the SCX24 skids, just for kind of alignment in the frame. I think those are going to have to get filed off or sanded off, because there is absolutely no flex in this frame. So there's no way to flex this apart to get those pegs in. Although these have the peg holes, but I think anything trying to do that is just going to result in marring up this finish. So instead of doing that, I'm going to mar up this, potentially just sand these down, I think. But anyways, I think that's the first mod to even try to move forward. And then once I see if that can fit in there, we'll get everything else mounted up and do a little test fit. Well, it looks like that little bit of peg grinding on that skid plate was exactly what this needed to drop in. You can see nice fitment, and I was able to get that cedar mounted in there, and then the forward mount. You can see I've got plenty of space up to that top plate. So chassis wise, this setup is going to work just great. I've got the wires on the side exit, and they look like they're going to fit back there just perfectly. So happy with that. As far as the interior, pretty good fitment here. It's not going to lay flat, but I could potentially screw the rear in, and then the front is actually going to sit up just a little bit there. But it looks like in fitting it, the hood would still be able to screw on there, because it kind of flares up for potential, windshield or where that would be. You can't even really tell that these guys are leaned back just a little bit. So I think that is going to be a good option there without having to cut that center console, that shifter out, because that is exactly what is sitting on that motor mount. So you can see here on the underside. So both sides kind of sit there, and then you see the thickness of that mount. So that's basically going to take out that whole shifter zone. Have a big chunk of red, potentially some of the driver's knee. So rather than getting into that and chopping these guys up, I'm going to leave them be, and think we're going to stick with this setup for now, and I'll just assume I'm going to make that interior work without modification. But as far as the ESC, I was kind of popping this around, fitting it. It looks like there's no way to kind of fit it inside without having to leave it on all the time. You can see kind of how large that is, takes up everything there. No way to really get to that switch. I was potentially thinking about a small 3S. It'd be nice to tuck that in here, maybe a ESC or maybe a receiver over here, and then I could always maybe mount this guy back here. Keep it kind of tucked to the cab and just leave all this empty. But of course that's going to cover up the nice engraving, so I'm going to ponder this a little bit. I do have the Lizard Ultimate as well. I do have a Lizard Pro, so I've got some options, different sizes. So I think for now we're going to move on and maybe look at getting some suspension on here, so some shocks, some links, and I've got options for both of those. And then we get some axles on here, and then we'll kind of circle back to electronics and testing this motor and then getting everything kind of hooked up. Next up, we've got some suspension options here. So I've got my standard favorites here, the long travel oil shocks from Hot Racing. So these are potentials, and then these are new big bore oil shocks from Hot Racing. I've not used these. They're a little bit shorter stroke, shorter length, so they may work well depending on the link setup. So here I've got Endura's kind of adjustable end, stainless steel black C10 or JLU links, and I believe that is what this wheelbase is set up for. But of course I may look at doing something a little bit different. So I've got Mofo RC's rear trailing arms. So these are deadbolt length lowers, so I'll have to dig out some deadbolt length uppers from spares that I've got potentially if we go this route. But I think I'm going to assemble these, kind of start mocking up some stuff. I can definitely get the front axle hung, kind of see maybe if that informs what kind of shock I want to use, and then I could potentially always mix and match these shocks, have set on the front, a different set on the rear. So anyways, I think I've got a little bit of work ahead of me, and I'll come back and we'll see if I made any progress. Well, progress I have made in the form of axles. So we've got a full kind of slider here, and you can see I ended up doing mix and match shocks. So I've got the long travel on the rear and the big bore shorter ones on the front, and man, they feel really nice. The big bores are similar to the long travel in that they have the removable shock collar at the bottom, so you can drop the spring without having to remove the cap once you have these oil filled. And the inside of the cap has a similar little bladder piece as these long travel. So very nice assembly. Very impressed with these big bores. So I've got these other two set aside for something else. And then you can see I decided to stick with the JLU rears versus these Mofo trailing arms here that are more deadbolt length. So if I line these up, you can kind of see where it would put that shock mount option here. So basically that shock would have to be pretty much vertical, and I really don't think it would give me a little bit more travel, I guess, especially with the length, but I don't know. I think it would have me sitting a little bit higher than I want to, and I'm already sitting higher than I'd like just because of this big honkin' link riser and the fact that this is a flat battery tray, so you really have nowhere to go. So a lot of times with the link risers, I can use those and get up between the frame rails, but you can see there's no way to do that here. So it would really be nice with these Meus axles or Meus axles if they had a non-link riser option for a setup like this. You could get this much lower, so you can see the front can get up a little bit lower. You can see those lower links start to angle up there. These rear lowers are basically starting out straight, so a little bit of rake to the front nose, I guess, but that's not going to be much of any rake. I mean, I don't think that'll be really noticeable. The front end is all nice and worked out. I started out with lengthening these lowers and figured out real quick that couldn't work, so these got tightened back, so as tight as you can get for a JLU front, and that sucked everything back because it ultimately It was the little piece of the grill, and it was this frame here. So I adjusted this upper drag link, kind of how it sat here, so it sat lower, and then I ran it out a little as well, so it didn't get extended as far this way because it's longer, and really that is the point where it's going to hit. So barely, just, I mean, it's right there perfect right now at full compression, but beforehand it was hitting that and was able to get lower over here. So now we are squared up, everything is about as tight as it can get with that front end, so you don't really have a lot of adjustment there. The only way to adjust would be to have shorter uppers, and you could probably lean that servo back a little bit, but you'd have to custom make those, I think. But anyways, I think that is the kind of chassis link setup right now and suspension. So I think we have that worked out. So the next thing is probably going to be testing this motor, and I guess picking out an ESC to pair with that motor. Okay, so I think I've decided to swap directions on the ESC and go with this smaller footprint Lizard Ultimate here on the right hand side. So it's a little shorter, just a hair narrower, and as you can see, it's not as long. So a little bit smaller footprint, basically the same except for the BEC. So the Ultimate is a, what is it, a 5 volt, a 6.5 volt, and an 8.4 volt at 3 amp. And the Python Pro has got the big boy BEC at 5 amp. So it is selectable at what, 5.5 volt, 7.4 volt, and 8.4 volt. So it also gives you that 7.4 step that this one does not. So that is really the main difference. Besides the sizing and this side switch versus the flush mount in button on this guy, which is really nice, but it's really a moot point. This was my last one new that I had on hand. They no longer make these Ultimates, so you're gonna have to go with either the Python Pro, the Python, or the Lizard, or Lizard Pro. But anyways, so with that decision made, I think I'll save this guy for potentially like a 6x6 with dual servos where it could actually use that 5 amp BEC. So that leaves us with our remaining components here. So this comes with your ESC cable. We'll have to come up with some extensions for the battery. I've got my little micro receiver here soldered up, ready to go with the FS-GT5. And then I've got drive shafts out here. So we've got the brand new short medium set. So as everyone knows, this is not a complete set for all options. So for the JLU front, you're going to need to provide your own JLU females. So I've got a couple of those here. And then otherwise, we've got the front male, we've got the rear male, and then we've got the rear female JLU C10 in here. So everything else is in the pack. So I'm going to hook this up, test the motor on my own, save some time, get the drive shafts installed, and then we'll look at getting a permanent home for these electronics. Time for a quick check-in here. I'm about 95% done with the electronics and lighting. So everything found a home very easily on these two big boat sliders. Nice and low below the interior. So that Ultimate is working out really good, keeping those top loading wires low below the interior. And you saw I made a Y cable for 2S or 3S battery option, which is easily accessible here or here. The Ultimate, I've got the button queued up, easily turned on and off right there. So very happy with that layout. Then the receiver sits over here, nice and low. You can see my 3-wire motor cable is bundled in multiple spots with little pieces of twist tie. So keeping that nice and clean, almost like a real engine bay. Then for the lighting, these little headlights, they gave me a little issue getting the grill to seat once I had those installed. Then I realized they have a flat edge on one side of them, so it's really easy to miss, but that has to be aligned with this vertical tube on the outside edge. So once that was aligned, the grill seated just fine. Those lenses, however, have nothing to really hold them in. So I use like 3 dots of shoe goo. And then you can see the little tiny wires here to their harness, which was just shy of reaching my receiver position. So instead of trying to cut and deal with those micro little wires, I just used my smallest servo extension, cut out the white wire, coiled it, and I've got the plug sandwiched there between the motor mount and that receiver. So nice and tucked low. So very happy overall with this layout so far. So really the only thing remaining, the 5%, is the light bar, getting that on. And you can see I've got it right here. So really nice unit they give you. Plenty of cable here. It just keeps going and going and going and going. It's like the Energizer Bunny. Wow. There's the end of it. So, you know, 1.5 feet later, we've got a light bar. So we're going to do something about that, get this guy chopped down to something a little more realistic for this build, save some weight and having to coil all of that under the interior. So I'm going to get this modified, we'll get it installed, get the lights on, and spin this guy up. All right, I have this whip shortened up, as you can see there. Just a nice little C shape, follows the roof line and that back rail coming on down to plug in. So super easy, and I also slipped over some heat shrink to black that out because of the kind of yellow, red, brown wiring there. So that looks nice and clean. And then on my interior up front, I added some Injora aluminum spacers there. So these are the ones that just come in the multi-packs that they sell. So those are super handy for builders setting things up, tweaking things. So the rear did not need any. So it just screws in as typical to that center screw down there. And then I think I'm gonna have to remove this interior and then sand a little off this edge. Since that dash is raised up a little, it needs to come in to get that hood to fully seat. The hood is about, I don't know, 95% fully seated, but not flush. So there's a gap at the joint right here with that side panel. So a little tweak there, looks like that'll fix that. Then I'll get this buttoned up, panels back on, and we'll give this guy a go. One last note on this light bar, as I'm getting everything buttoned up, you can see the tabs on the frame here are really thick, which is nice. But these are the tabs that the light bar comes with. So the light bar is set up with really short hardware, you can see there. So once I got the cross frame in for the roof, I guess I had it squeezed together a little bit to make it bite, but I couldn't even get the threads to bite. So the solution is obviously going to go to longer hardware, so I dug some out, just slightly longer. And then the kit says to use some little O-rings on the inside near the light, and that is because there's actually hardware that sticks out right there. So that will keep that from just marring up the pink finish. And then for me, I'm gonna use some flat washers on the outside to hopefully do the same, keep from marring that up as well. But just a little note there, this metal chassis, you're gonna need some longer hardware for that light bar. Okay, here we are, got it powered up obviously. So let's spin this motor up here before we start looking at all the light functions. Nice and smooth. Let's check out the steering. That is insane, that steering angle. So a little bit of noise from the metal gears, but that's expected. So let's take a look at it this way. We can see the lights a little bit better. So the headlights are always on. There's no function to those unless you have them hooked to a switch. But the light bar does have some functionality to it. So let's get some of these modes turned on. I guess that's your first one, just solid. You go to kind of a pink. Nice. And we're gonna pull some people over on the trail. And then again, we've got the red and blues. Then we've just got a crazy white strobe. Nice. We got the purple to blue really fast, Knight Rider. Nice, and we get kind of a white scanner. And then we've got just a pulsing rainbow. And then we're off, so quite a few functions there. So that is really kind of cool. All that's built in, no external switch. So let's take a look at the steering kind of from the bottom angle here, just so you can see a little bit better. So let's give it throttle. That's just incredible. I mean, super smooth, as you saw. No binding at all, no hint of anything. So really happy with that. Would be nice if the headlights had a built-in switch, but it's really cool that the light bar does. So anyways, that is the electronics, the lighting, so you know what that means. It's time to fill in the blanks here. So that is one of my favorite parts of any build. So without further ado, it is time for wheels and tires, and I have a stellar set lined up for you here. Hoping this combination is going to work. I've got the J-Concept Tusks in the 57s, which are specifically for the TRX 4M wheels. I've used those before, so I knew what I was getting into here. They've got this very oversized inner bead. You can see how thick it is. So it's very wide, very thick, so you've got to have a lot of space to account for that. So these won't fit typical 1.0 wheels. But, like I say, I've used them before. I figured out what kind of wheels to look for. Shopping on Amazon, I eyeballed these guys, so you can see how much larger diameter the actual ring is. So it gives you a lot of space for a thick bead, and then the actual ring is thinner than the wheel, so it gives you, again, more space for an oversized bead. So hoping these will work. These are like the 1+s, I believe, so a little bit larger than standard, but that's what I used last time as far as the type of wheel. So these are DJX as far as the brand. Like I said, Amazon, they want to make joy happen for RC, which is awesome because we do as well. We want to make some joy happen for ourselves. So speaking of that, I'm going to get these mounted up. We'll come back, see what this looks like with some pink wheels. Okay, here we are with that first set mounted up, and man, these pink wheels and that frame just look fantastic. Just a perfect color match right there. Couldn't be happier with that. Just wow. So as far as getting these mounted up, if you remember, those axles came with 2 O-rings at the end on each of them. One on the outer face of the hex, one behind the hex and behind the pin. So I took those off, then I couldn't get the wheel to seat without wobble with this fully tightened down. So I ended up using some Little Guy Racing +1 brass hexes. Took those O-rings out, took a little back spacing off the hex, but that allowed me to tighten the wheel nut down, and I've still got that nice shimmy I want, but my wheel is actually tight to the hex. It's not loose. That's the whole axle wiggling right there. So exactly what you want for that connection. As far as getting the tire onto the actual rim, no issues there. I use the stock foams. I've got these vented. As long as you've got the foam out from between the inner ring and the bead, you got no problem getting those on. And then sliding the face in, I actually get a little saliva on the bead of the tire, and that helps those drop right in. Gives you a little ability to twist those if you need to line them up as you're screwing them in. So let's take a look at this clearance here. So it looks like we're barely touching that chassis with the tire, but at full lock, we're definitely going to get into it. But that's expected when your steering angle is insane. But I'm not going to worry about that much. No getting around that with these axles here. But overall, just really happy with this guy. The look, and man, just great feel with these shocks. Great articulation here. So, I think you know what time it is. We're going to take a look at set number 2. All right, next up, you knew I had to do it. I've got the satin white little guy cyclones. So these look like perfect ripper wheels to me. So I've used these on my other ripper, actually, the little guy plastic ripper kit. So anyways, we're going to get these guys mounted up to these Injora 55 comp pins. So these guys are fairly wide. The compound is super thin, super soft. I'm going to keep the foam in there they come with, and we'll just see how those feel. But anyways, that's enough talking. I'm going to get these mounted up. Set number 2 mounted up, and these comp pins just totally change up the look, but I'm so digging it, and especially with these white wheels, color match to the panels. I'm liking that as much or more than the pink potentially, but just a little smaller size tire here. Let's check the clearance. So it looks like we are going to miss that lower chassis rail totally at full lock, which is great. See it full twist, just barely getting into it, but a much better condition than we had with those 57 tusks. So a little bit narrower probably and a little bit shorter, but wow, just looking fantastic. And they feel great. The wheel rings and wheels are vented, so these stock foams are just, man, they got a lot of squish. And like I say, this is a super thin rubber, so should conform quite nicely, but they definitely look the part. So if you know any of my builds, at least recently, they all not only have a primary set of wheels and tires, an alternate set of wheels and tires. I've also added in a wildcard set of wheels and tires, so this build will be no different. And I've got something I'm super excited about for the wheels. I've never used them before. Probably something's going to surprise you. It's not white, it's not pink, but it does tie into the build very nicely. So without further delay, let's take a look at this third set. So as you can see here, these are Shift RC Maverick wheels. So these are in the black with the etched white kind of logo there that match the servo. So these are going to be a little more subtle color matching, but they'll match the servo horn and the servo, but they just look fantastic. They've got a removable hub here on the rear, nice open back face, so if you had large weight hangers, large knuckles, they're going to clear them, which this does have some pretty large knuckles, but just super cool wheels. So very excited to get these mounted up. They come in just really nice packaging here. I left one set in the box, really cool looking. And since these are all aluminum, they're fairly lightweight. I picked up the optional brass rings for these guys. The rings aren't vented. Doesn't look like these are either, or the wheel. So I may have to address that with the tire. And speaking of, I've got Injora's, these are the smaller size. I want to say maybe 54 of the, what are these, the Swamp Claws. So I actually mounted these to another build, and then I had to, or I didn't have to, but I ended up swapping them off. So I haven't really run these, but need to get some foams in them. So I'll probably use some Crawler Innovations foams. Not sure where the stock ones are, but these just look super gnarly. They're about the same size here as the 55 pins that are on there. So hopefully size-wise, they're gonna work out just fine. And you see in this package here, these wheels do come with some little shims here. So these may be like 1 millimeter. So you can slip these in behind the hub. They give you a little bit longer hardware. So I think I may use these just to kick them out a little more, since this is a pretty gnarly, aggressive tread. That may give me a little more clearance to the shock. But I guess that's enough talk for now. I'm gonna get these mounted up and we'll see what these look like. Here we are with the third set mounted up, and I may have done it again. These may well be my favorites of the sets. Freaking wild cards coming through. Just looks stellar. Loving the white etch against the white panels. And then if you notice there, get a nice little design match on that servo. So very subtle, but it's there. So I think those look fantastic. And as far as the tires, I didn't vent the fronts. I put a half of Crawler Innovations foam. In the rear, I did vent. Same thing, I put a half, but I used a medium instead of a soft in the rear. And they seem to be reacting pretty nice. Felt that the fronts were already pretty soft without venting those. So I think I'm gonna start that way. I added the plus 1 millimeter spacer to the front, and that was perfect to get this out of the shock. So exactly what I needed. Didn't have to use it in the rear, so just left it off, but you can't really tell there's any difference there in the track width. But overall, these things are just looking super mean. And you can see I finally noticed the detail I was missing. I got some Little Guy Racing scale hubs on here, and I got theirs on there that are open-ended. So you've got to use some Loctite. There is no nylock in there. But the reason I went with these is because I had more threads sticking out on the rear than the front. So a capped scale hub actually wouldn't tighten down on the rear. So I had to go to this open end. But they look great. They work great. I had plenty of them on hand. So I think that's going to set us up here with all of our sets of wheels and tires. And I'm happy with every option, I gotta say. I don't know about you. You can let me know what your favorite is in the comments, but I think that's gonna wrap up this segment. Oh man, this thing looks so good. Before we move on, I wanted to touch on one little thing here that I noticed switching all these wheels out is the front axle here has just a ton of play on both sides. And these wheels are tightened down all the way to the hex. The hex back spacing is sanded down so that can fully seat on the pin, and the back spacing is like right there at the bearing. So the bearing is being retained, but there is just a lot of slop through those bearings and that little short stub here for that universal, or that double universal. So you can see it there just wobbling through the knuckle. So just something to know there. I don't know if that's why they stuck all those O-rings all over the axle ends there, but I don't like putting rubber pieces and anything that's going to put pressure against the bearing on the axle there. So I like to have everything, you know, free spinning as it should be. And I don't know, that just seems like almost like the bearings have the play, and they're just allowing that axle just to have a lot of slop coming through the knuckle. But I don't know, something to deal with. It may drive kind of wandery, who knows, but it's not going to kill it. This is a crawler, so it's going slow speeds, not high speeds. But anyways, with that said, let's move on here. So typically this would be the point in the build where we would get this guy on the scales, see where we ended up, get a battery in it, check the bias, maybe do a little tuning. But currently my scales are a three-legged dog. So I've got one of my wired scales not working, so I have ordered some new wireless SkyRC scales. So while we wait on those, we're gonna have to figure out something to do to fill the time. And I think I have just the thing to fill that time. So you remember Orange 29, don't you? Well, you didn't think I was gonna show it to you and not build it, did you? So I think it's about time that I crack this cellophane, get into this box, see what it's all about. But as I was building the Pink Ripper, I kind of changed my mind on how I wanted to do this one a little bit. So I think I'm gonna take the lessons I've learned, make a few tweaks. Of course, there's gonna be different motor ESC, obviously some differences, but I'm gonna go ahead and build this one up, catch it up to the point of the other pink and white Ripper, and then we'll have two to compare, two to weigh in when I eventually get those scales. So sit back, relax, and I'll be back in a few seconds with another built Ripper chassis. I'll run down the differences between the two, and then we'll jump into wheels and tires for this Ripper. Then we should hopefully have the scales at that point to finish this build video up. I know I said I was going to come back with a complete ripper, but I thought I'd do a little kind of midway check-in. So I've got it torn down, got the motor and transmission installed. So a couple notes here. I'm using Mofo's standard mount transmission, or motor mount with the transmission. And it has the transfer gear. It allows for the motor to sit nice and low in the stock position. It does kind of hang over the side skid just a little bit there, but not too much. But plenty of clearance there, as you can see. So really nice and low motor position, but using it with this micro Komodo, the actual gear shaft sticks out from the pinion quite a bit. So I had to modify the motor cover plate here, as you can see there. I meant to do a hole, kind of missed, so I ended up with a slot there. And then one other thing was, you can see one of the screws there has a little spacer. So it would not thread in all the way. So I don't know if it was abutting something in that motor, but I didn't want to force it. So I just spaced it out so I could tighten it down and put a little thread lock on all those motor screws. But let's give this guy a little spin up test here and see what this guy sounds like. So we've got metal gears in that transmission. Nice and smooth startup. Super quiet. Still super quiet for metal gears. Just at that top end, you start to hear a little of that rattle from the metal gears, but man, that is super, super quiet. Don't know if it has something to do with that transfer gear being nylon, kind of separating the metal motor gear, pinion gear from the spur gear. That may help reduce some of that noise, but nice and quiet, nice and smooth. So anyways, that is the motor transmission setup for this guy. So a little different than last time, a little different motor position. So that is going to affect the electronics layout, but should still have plenty of room in here. Kind of eyeballing the back plate here of the battery mount. So I could always double side a component up there. And then of course I've got the opposite side tray, full usage there. But anyways, that's the progress so far. So I'm going to keep moving right along. This thing is going pretty quickly. So hopefully I'll be back in a second with a complete ripper. All right, back with a complete ripper as promised. And as you saw, that went together pretty easily the second time with just a few changes. So besides the ESC motor and switch that I added for the lights, the big change was the axles and the suspension. So let's run through that real quick. So obviously I used different axles. I used Super 8s, and part of that was because I wanted to use something without a link riser in the rear to get the suspension sitting a little bit lower. And also was thinking about maybe a little larger tire size, so a little extra width would help there. And then for the front, there's a little bit of a struggle on the setup. You can see I did lengthen the lowers a little bit to kick out the bottom of the axle to get better caster there. Ended up using the little guy non-adjustable servo tray So you can't move the servo position, but it does have 3 holes, so you can lean it back for the caster. So I used it for that reason, to kind of kick this back even further. And then you can see I've got the link mounted on the back side as typical, so opposite of the other ripper, and that servo horn is just right there. So it's about as tight as you can get, and then at full lock, we just clear the frame. We kind of slide off of it right there with the servo horn, but it's a smooth kind of round edge, so no problem. And then the other side, the stop point again is the drag link on the bottom of the frame, and we do hit it, so it hinders a little compression at full lock, but when you're basically straight on, you can get all the way down. So overall, pretty happy with the suspension. And of course, the big change is the stretch. So I haven't measured it, but it looks like maybe like a 10 centimeter stretch. I've got the front a little more forward, and the back, obviously, with the deadbolts a lot longer. So anyways, that's the setup, and then you saw the electronics, so that all went in very nicely and cleanly. So I think with that said, we are ready to get some wheels and tires on this thing, moving towards those scales. Jumping right back into wheels and tires, you knew I had to start with some colors, so we're going to do some matching anodized orange for this one. And these are the new Treal wheels. These are basically a few weeks old, so brand new at the time of release here. They've got the removable hub like the new style wheels do, and they look just incredible. And of course, these are just a little bit larger diameter, as all Treal wheels are, but I think these are going to work just great. So setting those aside, I've got some brand new tires as well. So these are from Hobby Soul. These are about 60 millimeters by about 23, 24, but they basically look like some cut swampers, and they've got a great feel to the rubber. Got a nice feeling foam in there, kind of a medium soft, but I think I'm going to mount them up as is, see how they feel. But that's the first combo here. Definitely something pretty aggressive, but color match. So we've got the pink set for the pink and white, and we'll have the orange set for the orange and silver. So I'm going to get these mounted up, and we'll see what they look like. Back with this orange set mounted up, and man, it looks so good. I'm just really digging that new style from Treal, and those tires look so aggressive with the cut treads. They feel pretty good on the foams, vented. Just have to see how they perform, but pretty impressed so far from Hobby Soul on these tires. Definitely loving the length here. You can see how much departure angle I've got with this stretch. Just incredible. Got probably a little more approach angle than the other one, but let's take a look here at full lock. So great steering angle, good caster. Let's take a twist here. So it looks like we are missing the frame with plenty of space here with these large tires. So we're probably going to be all right at the nose. Yeah, we are just kissing it there, but no problem. So these look really good. So I think I'm happy with this orange set. Got a good cage color match there. So I think it's time to take a look at set number 2. Got the second set queued up here, and I've got another set of Shift RC wheels, another set of color matched rims to the panels. So these are the Vision 398 Manx. So these are officially licensed, and same deal as the last. They have the removable hub. They've got an aluminum ring, and the wheel is not vented, but just a super nice looking wheel. And just like the others, they come with the shim if you want to slip that behind the hub to push these out just a hair. But overall, just really good looking wheels, and they're going to match perfectly to those aluminum panels. So I did pick up the brass rings again to give those a little more weight. And for the tires, I've been trying on different ones in the kind of the size range that I had on hand, and I kind of landed on these Endura mud terrain crawler tires. So these are their aggressive I don't know that these are modeled after any real tire, but they're just really aggressive. I thought they'd be a really good look on this Ripper. Seems like everything that I tried in this size that was a little more tame, a little more all-terrain looking, just didn't have the edge I was going for. So anyways, I'm gonna get this set mounted up and we'll take a look at it. Here we are with option 2, and man, these shift wheels look super clean. Matching the panel color, just looks so nice. And those tires, I think, were the right decision. They look really good. Good pairing there, good matchup. And one thing about those tires, man, I put some new foams in here, some Crawler Innovations, and it just totally changed the feel of these. I even had to step it back to mediums in the front. So this is a full uncut medium, and it is just super supple. The softs were just crazy. They were just too soft for the weight of this thing. So I ended up leaving the stock foam in the rear, so that is a good kind of medium feel, and all of these tires are vented. So I think that'll be a good setup there. And fitment wise, they seem to work just fine. We've got clearance to the frame, we've got clearance to the nose. So these are gonna work just as well as the last set, basically the same size and similar kind of chunky look here. So I think that sets this up quite nicely with 2 sets of wheels and tires. So what do you think? Should we do a third? Well, of course we're doing a third set. So as you can see, I've got out my choices here on the table. I've already done quite a bit of tire fitment on this to see what I liked on the wheel. Looked at a few different wheels. This one was a little more difficult, being silver and orange, trying to find anything besides black for that third wheel. So what I chose here was these rims from Magic Racing, or MRC. So these are from Amazon. I did these in a wheel video quite a while ago, and I just haven't got them on a rig, but they're really nice looking wheels, nice open back face, and they've got a little weight to them with a weighted ring here. But from all the wheels I sized up, these ended up looking pretty good. And the tires I've got are another new set to me. These are DJ Crawler. I believe these are 60s by maybe like 24. They're pretty wide. But one difference here in these DJ Crawler tires versus the others is they come with a nice soft foam, and they give you a firm. So the old ones, I think, just came with this really stiff one. So now we've got a really nice feeling foam in here. So I've actually got one mounted up, and you can see here a nice stretch from the face of that rim. So I think these look really good. I like having a wide tire on a flat face rim, just gives it a little more depth. But these mounted up no problems, and these are unvented with that soft foam, and they are just super compliant, but they've still got some support. So I'm going to leave these as is. Very happy with this. It almost feels like I've got a Crawler Innovations uncut foam in here. But that's going to be the third set. So I'm going to go ahead and mount the remaining 3 up, get them on the truck, and we'll take a look at it. And here we are with the third set mounted up, and I gotta say, these are looking fantastic, especially for not really having these picked out or planned. This ended up being a really nice combo. It's hard to go wrong with black, and that is no exception here. Just digging the simplicity of it, and I'm really liking the polished highlights with the silver panel. I think that works really good. And these tires, like I say, feel great. And I did wash all of these tires brand new out of the package with some dish soap, and that really kind of brings them to life, gets rid of any mold release agent, and gets them nice and sticky. But overall, just super happy with the look of them. Nice, nice stance here. Let's check it from the front. Definitely got it a little wider, a little more aggressive looking. And as far as clearances here, I think because of the width of these tires, we're getting into the nose just a hair here. Hopefully with the end points, we'll just miss it. But we're clear definitely, as always, on the inside of the frame because this axle is kicked so far forward. So that is good news. But overall, just very happy with the outcome here. So I think now we've got both rippers set up with 3 fantastic sets of wheels and tires. And luckily, my brand new scales have arrived. So we can actually get these guys on the scales, size them up, and see where we ended up with each of these builds. Well, here we are with 2 rippers fresh off the scales, and despite being different setups here, they both basically came out to the same weight, hitting around the 430 gram mark, somewhere in there, except for these colored wheels. I think these heavy ones put this one up to 500, and these Treals put this one to like 450. But pretty good bias. It was pretty much hitting 57, 43, 58, 42 with any of the setups. So can't complain there. And just looking at them here, you can see definitely the wheelbase difference. So I can get them up here a little more side by side. I guess I'll put the short one in front. Line up the back axle. You can see this tire, his nose is sticking way out here. Let's see if we line up the bodies. It's hard for you to see, but you got the tire sticking out here from that silver one on both ends, and it looks like the bodies are just about lined up. But just a nice little stretch for that silver one, something different, so they're not both the same. And I think that right there is going to lead us into a little tabletop testing fun. So I think that's next. All right, figured we'd start off with the orange and silver guy here since you haven't seen it run yet. One of the main differences is the headlights are switched. So that is super handy, especially for this testing. And then the light bar is switched with all the same modes as the pink and white one. So no difference there, but handy to be able to turn off both sets of lights, especially for filming like this. So good steering angle on this guy, not as good as the Meus axles, obviously, but with that additional caster of the axles, can't complain. These Super 8s are always really well performers as far as turning, and these are no exception. The CVDs are really smooth, really nice. I always find that I have to back them off just a hair from the max point of the axles, but once you do that, there's no binding at all with those at full lock. But a nice slow creep here with that micro Komodo, nice and quiet. Look at that, we'll just slow it on down here. So it looks like everything is functioning nicely. That's at 6.5 volts, that servo, so not super fast, but still plenty of torque. So I think we're gonna get this guy queued up and run some of these ramps. All right, we're gonna creep up on these ramps, check this articulation on this guy. Now it's not an insane articulator. We've got the short throw big bore shocks in the front, so most of the travel is coming from that rear end, and the fact that this thing is long and wide. But man, boy, it looks good creeping along here. All right, we'll check the stats on the RTI ramp here, see if we can get up to the top. Just lifting off. So not all the way to the top. I bet if we settle out these oil shocks, almost. So it looks like right there. So basically I would call that almost at the top. So not bad at all. Nice slow crawl. super silent. Man, those tires just look excellent. And same for the orange rims, fantastic. All right, we're gonna come back at this the opposite way. Let's get some lights on. Very nice. Let's see if we can claw up the backside of this ramp with these gnarly tires. Oh, no problem. Nice little creep. We can clear the sliders just barely. So I can get back on course here. Very nice. Well, I think this guy has definitely passed its tabletop test, so I think we are ready for Mr. Pink. All right, here we are with the Pink Panther. Got to come up with a consistent name for this thing. So it is a little bit noisier with the cedar and the metal gears, but a much quicker response on that servo, being up at 8.4 on that Ultimate. And of course the steering is just insane. Look at that. That is just nuts. Do a little preview over here. Boy, that's some loud gearing, but this cedar is nice and smooth. Look at that crawl. Look at that. And it's nice and sealed, waterproof, as well as the Ultimate. So this thing could take a bath. Well, the receiver, I guess, is not waterproofed at this point, but all the other components are. So that's nice. All right, so I think let's do the same kind of deal. Let's take a look at the articulation and RTI ramp. All right, I'm assuming this will be quite similar as far as articulation. A little bit shorter, but the same shock setup. So about the same articulation here. Let me square that up a bit. So right there at the top, this may be a little bit better. It's about the exact same. It's a little bit shorter in length, a little bit narrower, but I think it gets a little more travel in the front since the shocks are leaned. All right, let's come back at it. No problem for the tusks. So I think we have the second rig that has officially passed the tabletop test portion. And man, this one is looking good. Loving that pink and white, super nice. So I think that wraps up the tabletop testing portion of the build. Well, here we are with pink 162 and orange 29 finally on the table together. So I think this is gonna wrap up the build for these guys. And as always, I am just super happy with how these guys turned out. I think there's some pros and cons to each of these builds, but overall just a fantastic process here, very enjoyable. So first off, you can see the steering angle here. So definite pro on this guy, getting into the 50s with this, super nice. The kickback caster and the nice CVD throw of these Super 8s is still very good, but nothing compared to this. So I've actually ordered some new inners from XO USA that are basically U-joint style CVDs. So they promise in the 50s as well. So when I get those in, I'll swap them in and see if that's gonna get this tire in here close to the shock like this guy. So that's the first thing. Con over here to this guy would be the rear axle having the link riser only. So that limits how far up you can get or how far down you can have the chassis actually sit on the axles. So that's a pro on this one, using the Super 8s with no link riser. So that's nice and low, so I can get all the way up to that battery tray. So that is really nice. The caster is a pro on this, but it puts the shocks at a more vertical position, which is a little bit of a con because I've got less travel than this guy with the shocks leaned. This actually has more travel. Speaking of shocks, really liking these big bore hot racing with the removable lower collar just as much as the long travels. So I think they're a great option if you have a heavier rig and you want that big bore, and having a super long throw is not a big concern. These are going to be perfect. But if you need a little more length, then the long travels are always nice, and they are nice and supple in the rear, nice and soft. So very happy with that. And I guess the other big comparison here would be the motors. That'd be the big difference. And gotta say, just really surprised with the cedar at how loud it is in the metal transmission versus the Komodo with the metal gears in the transmission. So it's gotta be that little transfer gear being nylon that must isolate it, because this guy is just so silent compared to this one. And of course, I think both of them are louder because everything is metal. So every sound is gonna resonate more, but just noticeably quieter on this one. Both of them insanely smooth at low speed, and plenty of punch on both of them as well. So very happy overall. And my favorite thing about this one, I think, is the switchable headlights. So I may order up that same module. Looks like I've got space on that battery bulkhead that I did not mount anything, so I could put it right there, because I do not have that space up front because of that cedar motor. It kind of takes up all of that area. I don't think I would have enough to give it a home, but definitely like the switchable lights. As far as the coloring, man, I can't decide. They're both just beautiful. Loving all the wheels here. I was gonna put another set on for the end, but I couldn't decide which one, so I figure you'll just see all the other sets in the gallery. But really like the sheen of this silver, but I also like the satin or matte finish of this powder coated white. So it's just super clean as well. But just really fun little builds. Don't know why I have two of them, don't need two of them, but it was sure fun to build them both. One other little thing I noticed while I was assembling these was they've got some unused threaded holes here. I was like, that would be super cool to have some kind of spare tire mount that would sit over the rear. I would definitely put that on there. But with that said, I think that is going to bring us to the end here. So as always, I hope you learned something along the way on the build journey. I definitely did. This was definitely a fun one, doing two at once basically, and getting to do some tweaks as I learned things along the way. But I guess until next time, thanks for watching. Well, before we get to the gallery, I figured we might as well build one more Ripper. Just kidding.